Hi, welcome to this video. My name is Runepanel, you can call me Rune, and today we're talking about the classes in Avowed. Now, as you can see the title, we got a bit of a problem here. But I also suppose the problem is an opinion, and I believe that there is only one fun skill tree to spec into in this game. The rest are boring and unintuitive. Of course, it's an opinion. You can disagree with me if you feel differently, but do watch the video because I did a lot of testing to come to this conclusion. So, how did I come to this conclusion? Well, obviously, firstly, I respect into every class and I played them. I tested them in the exact same location to see exactly how well they tackled the same encounter. Now I've been trying out every class just a bit here and there in the open world, just playing the game, but I decided to do a very thorough and narrowed down experiment, so to say. The encounter in question is a boss fight in a cave. It's an optional boss fight, but in the cave there's a boss with several adds, a tank and a healer. I think it's in total maybe 8 enemies, maybe 10, I'm not exactly sure how many. But there are several hard enemies. There are also some enemies outside the cave that I will also deal with. So we do the cave fight and then we do the outside fight. That's the test. And I will be doing this with each class and I will be showing you the abilities I used and what they do with tooltips on the screen so you can follow along and understand every skill that I'm using in every class so you understand what's actually going on. And I will be showcasing all the gameplay footage in the background as we're speaking right now. I'm going to begin with the fighter class. The fighter is like a warrior, right? They're supposed to be tanky and do damage. Then you got the ranger class. This is a mix between archer and rogue. And lastly, we got the wizard class, which is a mage, obviously, that's spell casting and self-buffing, average wizard stuff. Also to note, all my equipment is around the same level as the enemies in this area. So I'm not overpowered or underpowered with any of the classes. I either had enough equipment or I went and bought the equipment to the same tier as the enemies are. In my party, I will also be using Marius, which has a root ability, AoE root ability, and Gyata, which is a healer and has a party heal. Now, enough introduction, let's start with the actual showcase. So we're starting with fighter. For the fighter class, I used a two-handed hammer and heavy armor. I spec'd all my attribute points into might, then constitution, for some damage and tankiness. The abilities I had to choose from was a charge attack that lets me dash at the enemies and knock them back, and then a shout that taunts enemies around me and buffs me. The fighter class did not feel like a fighter at all when you actually played the game. It felt extremely repetitive. I was basically spamming left click with only 2 active abilities to choose from. Your gameplay loop is basically charging at the enemies, and then you taunt them, and then you left click spam until you either do enough damage to kill them, your ability comes back, or the enemy's stun bar fills up high enough so that you're able to do a finisher on them. And then you rinse, and then you repeat. Besides that, I actually felt extremely squishy for being a frontliner. I used heavy armor, so I thought I was gonna be way tankier than I actually was. And I even had bonus health and a healer in the party, but I still struggled in this encounter. It took me 3 total tries, I died 3 times. It actually in general just felt like a pretty damn boring, bland fight. And I was actually very confused at how I was dying so quickly, because I would really just get eaten up by the enemies. When I was done with the cave, the enemies outside were no real threat, so I cleaned them up as soon as I finished the cave fight. So in general, I had 3 deaths as a fighter. And that was all for the fighter. Moving on to the ranger class. For ranger, I used the alteration between 1 and 2 daggers and a bow. so dual wielding daggers or being ranged. I spec'd my attributes into dexterity and then might, for fast attacks with some extra damage. I felt like Rogue was extremely dependent on the stealth attack mechanic, which you could only use when you had the stealth ability was up. Since this was an insta-engage fight, I was never able to use the stealth attack as an engaging factor. Instead, I just had to go straight into it. Nevertheless, in the open world, you only get out basically one stealth attack before the enemy spots you. So usually you don't have any stealth options after the combat starts. The Rogue gives you the option to engage the stealth combat mid-combat, if you understand my gist. So I was basically waiting for my cooldown to finish so I could spam the stealth attack. And the stealth attack did massive damage. It would almost insta-kill any enemy that was not the boss. But besides that, my daggers did alright damage, nothing special. The bow though, it felt particularly useless besides taking a few pot shots at a distance. It didn't do much damage and it just felt clunky to use, at least in the cave. I did struggle a lot with how squishy I was, and I would die almost instantly from maybe 1 or 2 combos, and it was really quick. Even the small guys was a huge threat to me. It took me a total of 6 tries before I beat the enemies in the cave. And I went outside, and the guys outside, they did not pose a threat just like the fighter, so it was no problem really. The only reason I actually won the cave fight is because I ran away and I baited them slowly, and at times I also lost aggro because I was outside their aggro range. This was not the ideal way to fight in my opinion, and it felt pretty scummy and I cheesed the fight basically. Now, I'm not usually a guy against scummy tactics in games. I sometimes love cheesing enemies, and it's sometimes part of the fun. But if I had to do this every single fight, I would have quit the game and I would have said this is garbage. But that's that. Let's move on from Rogue and let's talk about the Wizard. As I said, I started with the Wizard class. I mainly spec'd here into Intellect and some into Perception and Resolve. I will be trying different subclasses for Wizard actually, and these will be Lightning, Fire, Ice and Battle Mage. And I will do so to see if any of these subclasses are performed differently. Now, there aren't actually subclasses in the game. There are skill trees, and there's obviously lightning themed skills, fire themed skills, ice themed skills, and more melee centric skills. I decided to go down these paths and make my own subclasses, specifically focusing on these spells, so that I'm isolating them in a sense for the experiment. To note, I will also have some spells available at all times, because that's what I have been using in my grimoire, such as the Mage Armor, the Magic Missile and the Battle Staff. These are usually available in almost every grimoire you equip. You will see me using them besides the elemental specific abilities. Now, I will of course be primarily using say fire, ice or lightning when I'm using the subclass, but I will be also using these other abilities that are given to me because in general I am still a wizard and a wizard has access to all these spells at a time. For these fights, I will only be showing the inside of the cave because every time I would go outside, the enemies outside are way easier than the enemies inside the cave, so I saw no reason to also showcase that. I will only be showcasing the inside of the cave for the wizard class, which I believe is still substantial for my experiment. So let's start. We're beginning with the lightning wizard. And as you can see in the video, I completely destroyed the enemies here. I still took a bit of damage and I had to heal, but the mage armor I put on myself initially helped me out a ton. And it made me quite tanky, and I was dishing out tons of damage with the lightning. I was actually surprised at how insanely tanky I got from the mage armor after playing both fighter and rogue. But all this lightning, it got me several stuns in the early stages of the fight, and I did a lot of damage. It was really solid, really fun, and it looked really cool too. Now at this point I was a bit questioning if I should still keep mage armor in or not for this experiment, because it really changed it for me. It was really easy with the mage armor because I stopped basically taking damage when mage armor was active. Now I still went against this decision because, as I said earlier, mage armor is almost available to you from the start of the game. You're always almost going to have access to the spell. It's in most of the grimoires in the game, and if you're not using a grimoire, you can easily spec into it from level 1. Sorry, level 2 actually. But yeah, you still have the option. It's a really strong spell and it gives you a lot of flexibility, so to say. But let's move on to the other wizard, which is the fire wizard. The fire wizard was a bit harder to fight compared to the lightning one, but it still did the job. My fire attacks were not as effective as the lightning ones because it was a pretty small room with a lot of packed enemies, so I didn't cover as much area with my attacks. But I did add tick damage, and I did eventually do enough damage to kill some of the weaker enemies. Not my primary choice in general in combat, but I'd still say it did a good enough job. And I cleared it first try. Also, to be clear, I cleared the lightning wizard with my first try too. And moving on to the ice wizard, I once again cleared out all the enemies first try, struggling around the same level as the fire wizard, but I had way more crowd control here, and I was just lacking the damage basically. So still good enough damage overall, and the crowd control really helped me here. Besides that, the mage armor has been carrying me and keeping me alive both as the fire wizard and the ice wizard. So mage armor really goated. Maybe too broken, who knows. But lastly, battle mage. And you're wondering why I did battle mage? Well, I was curious myself for the melee combo potential of magic and melee basically, right? Because I found the melee so underwhelming in the other two classes, I decided to try the melee in this shape. And I've been using melee as a wizard before. You can see that in my previous videos I actually use it just in the open world, like I would do when I play the game. But the battle mage did really well, I'd say. I basically used spells that would surround myself with AoE damage from different elements. And then I used the mage armor, and then I used the battle staff. Very simple setup. I basically buff myself up and then I go into melee combat. And since I added extra points into mage armor, I was even tankier than before. And with the rings around me plus the magic staff, I was doing huge damage, basically had infinite mana because of the staff, and at the same time I was as tanky as I could possibly be. And that's all about mages. So what is the conclusion here really? Well, clearly there seems to be one class doing what every other class is doing, and that is wizard. Wizard is such a diverse class, and it can do so many things at the same time. And it's by far the best choice and the most fun choice too, at least in my opinion. If you want range, you have several ranged abilities as wizard. If you want crowd control, you got it. If you want single target damage, you got it. If you want a tanky build, you got it. Wizard is doing everything at the same time, and it's doing everything else better than the other classes too. It feels like everything revolves around the wizard class, and it's almost as if you have to spec into wizard class to make some sort of combination with the other classes for them to work. Because only going with, say, fighter or ranger, you will only have 2 active abilities and then like 10 passives. And let's get this straight. I'm level 11 and I've played for over 10, maybe 15 hours into the game now, maybe even 20, I'm not sure. I've played a lot of hours. And leveling is slow in this game. And every level you get only 1 skill point and 1 attribute point. So leveling feels very meaningful, at least for me when I was playing mage. But if I had been playing fighter or rogue, and I would have had 1 ability and I'd be fully maxed with that ability at level 4, and the rest were just passives, I would be pretty damn bored. I would have quit the game probably. And maybe that was the intention, or maybe it wasn't. I don't know what the games were thinking when they made that. To me, it just feels like fighter and ranger are not just boring, they're also not even viable to play. They have so little interactive gameplay that the combat will end up really bland and boring. And I actually initially didn't realize why people were saying the combat was bad, the combat was boring in this game, but I kinda realize this now. This side of the combat, it's awful. I had such a horrible time doing this experiment because the game was boring. All these hours I've been playing for like 10-15 hours and I've had a blast, especially with the combat. I could even forgive some of the bad things around me because the combat was so good in my opinion. But then I tried this and I was so shocked at how shit it was. Without the wizard spells, the combat felt really boring and it was not fun at all. Just a repetitive left click spam waiting for one single ability to go off of cooldown? A nightmare, really. But hey, this is where the game shines a bit. Because at the end of the day, you don't have to have the weapons you have to use. You can have a wand, a bow, a gun, a sword, a shield, a dagger, whatever, right? And if you don't like the ranged combat with the wands for wizard, slap on a melee weapon instead and alter between ranged spellcasting and then engaging in melee fighting. I actually really like that in my playstyle right now. I do some spellcasting, I take out my staff and I go whacking. It's really nice, it alters the combat and the melee is fine then. The melee is actually pretty fun then, when you have more things to do instead of just melee combat with one ability. And hey, I'm not sure if this was some undeveloped feature. Maybe they made the wizard class initially and then later they haphazardly added rogue and fighter. I'm not sure. To me, it feels like you should primarily be a wizard and you should be playing as a wizard. If you don't like wizard stuff, maybe stay away from the game. That's gotta be my suggestion. Because if you just want to be a tanky melee guy or a ranger, sure, at level 15 you get a few cooler skills. I haven't tried them yet, I'm not there yet. But, you know, you get a bit of cooler stuff. I still wouldn't say it's worth it. I don't know. I don't think the combat will carry you that far, so to say. But if you like magic stuff, wizardry, battle mage shit, I think this is good. The game really does that really well. And for me, that's more than enough. I'm having a blast with the playstyle I'm having. I'm switching around my mage spells constantly, respeccing in wizard, just so I can try the new spells and do like an AoE build, to do a single target build, to do a tanky build. I love all that a lot in this game. But rogue, ranger, whatever you want to call it, fighter, warrior, whatever, they are really, really bad in my opinion. And they have to get a rework if that's the way the game wants to go. But you draw your own conclusions from what I've presented and what you've yourself experienced. Perhaps this is just not the game for you. Perhaps I am wrong. Who knows? This is what I found through my experimenting. I found out that wizard is great, super fun class. Ranger and fighter, super boring, stay away. Maybe spec into them if you want some of the passives. If you're, for example, a melee caster, then you can, for example, spec into your favorite melee weapon to boost its damage. Or if you're using heavy armor, you can spec into some of the passives. It feels more like those skill trees are passive skill trees, while wizard is your main skill tree, if you get my vibe. But for now, that's all for me, folks. So let's chat in the comments. What do you think about this? Am I onto something or am I completely crazy? Have you tried the game and have you experienced this? Because I would like to know more of people that have played the game and your input on this. Because either I'm crazy, just call me out for that. But if you agree with me, do show that in the comments. But as always, thank you for watching. If you found this video informative, please do leave a like and subscribe. It always cheers me up, of course. As always, thank you again for watching, and I will see you in the next video.